My manager mocked my pregnancy, humiliated me in front of colleagues, and made me feel worthless until I decided enough was enough. I thought I could tell them. I thought it would be simple, like sharing any other piece of personal news, but I was wrong. The day I announced my pregnancy, my manager, Mr. Thompson, leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "Well, I guess your career ends here, huh?" A ripple of laughter followed from a few coworkers. I froze, my hand resting on my stomach as if that alone could protect me. I blinked, trying to process the words. My mind raced. Was this really happening? Could someone actually say something so cruel so publicly and get away with it? "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice tighter than I wanted. He shrugged casually, leaning back. "I mean, come on. How much can you actually handle now? Meetings, deadlines, travel? Maybe you should take it easy. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just teasing. It was humiliation." My coworkers' smiles faded slightly, some avoiding eye contact, others nervously pretending to type. The air around me felt heavy, sticky with judgment. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My heart pounded. My first instinct was to burst into tears, to run to the bathroom and hide, but another voice inside me said, "No, this is wrong. You're not alone. You have rights." I finished the meeting silently, nodding politely, hiding the anger and the fear in my chest. My mind was already working, cataloging everything, every word, every smirk, every laugh. I knew I needed evidence. I knew I needed allies. And most importantly, I knew I couldn't let this pass. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, documenting the incident. I wrote down his exact words, the time, who was present, how everyone reacted. I felt a strange mixture of anger and resolve. I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about principle. If someone could treat me like this for expecting a child, what message were they sending to every other employee? The next day, I decided to approach HR quietly. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted documentation, protection, and guidance. I wanted someone in authority to know the truth, to be aware of the patterns that were beginning to emerge. As I walked down the hall to HR, I felt every possible emotion collide inside me: fear, anxiety, dread, but also determination. If Mr. Thompson thought he could humiliate me, undermine my worth, and silence me with laughter, he had underestimated one thing: my resolve. I reached the HR office and took a deep breath. This was the first step in a long journey. A journey not just to protect myself, but to stand up for fairness, dignity, and respect in the workplace. I didn't know how it would unfold. I didn't know if I'd face retaliation. But I did know one thing: I wouldn't let him break me. Not this time. If your manager mocked you for being pregnant, would you confront them immediately, report to HR, or stay silent? The HR office was small, brightly lit, and surprisingly calm compared to the storm raging in my mind. I explained the situation as clearly and calmly as I could, recounting the exact words my manager had said, the laughter in the room, and the way he dismissed my capabilities. The HR representative, Ms. Patel, listened intently, nodding occasionally. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," she said. "We take these complaints seriously. I'll need all the details you can provide, any emails, messages, or witnesses who were present. This will help us assess the situation and take the necessary action." I felt a flicker of relief. Finally, someone was taking my words seriously. Finally, the burden of humiliation didn't rest solely on my shoulders, but a deeper part of me still feared retaliation. Mr. Thompson was not the kind of manager who took criticism lightly. Over the next few days, I carefully documented every interaction with him, every dismissive comment, every sigh, every veiled insult. I kept emails that hinted at exclusion from projects and notes from coworkers who had witnessed his inappropriate jokes. Each detail added weight to the story I was quietly building, and each entry strengthened my resolve. Meanwhile, I noticed subtle shifts in the office. Colleagues who once seemed indifferent began to offer quiet support. Maya, a coworker from the marketing team, leaned over one day and whispered, "I saw what he said to you. That was unacceptable. Don't let him make you feel small." Her words, soft but sincere, made me realize I wasn't alone. Some people noticed, some people cared, yet the fear of escalation loomed. Mr. Thompson noticed I was no longer passive. He began testing boundaries subtly, assigning me last-minute tasks, questioning my abilities in meetings, and occasionally standing too close, as if daring me to complain. I took deep breaths, kept my head high, and reminded myself of my plan: document, collect evidence, protect my rights. One evening, I opened my laptop after work and reviewed the notes I'd taken. The pattern was clear. This was not a one-off comment. This was a consistent effort to undermine and intimidate me, to make me question my competence simply because I was pregnant. I realized that if I stayed silent, I wasn't just protecting him. I would be enabling a toxic culture. I also started quietly researching my legal rights. Pregnancy discrimination was illegal, and there were protections in place that I could use if HR failed to act. This knowledge gave me a small but growing sense of power. I wasn't helpless. I had options. As I closed my laptop, I made a silent vow. I would not let fear dictate my actions. I would pursue this carefully, strategically, and firmly. I didn't just want justice for myself. I wanted to make sure that no one else would face the same mockery or humiliation in silence. The next morning, I returned to work with a quiet determination. My manager might have laughed at me once, but he had no idea what was coming next. If you had a manager constantly undermining you for being pregnant, would you rely on HR first or gather legal knowledge before taking action? By the end of the week, I noticed a change in Mr. Thompson's behavior. He seemed sharper, more calculating. Meetings that once ran smoothly now felt tense, every glance at me loaded with unspoken judgment. It was as if he knew I had begun quietly documenting everything. It started with subtle remarks in the staff lounge. "Are you sure you can handle this project now?" he'd ask, voice dripping with false concern. Or in meetings, he'd interrupt, correcting me unnecessarily, making small jokes at my expense while others chuckled awkwardly. Each incident was minor on its own, but collectively they painted a clear pattern of harassment. I didn't react outwardly. I kept my tone professional, my face neutral, but inside, a storm was brewing. Every time he mocked or belittled me, I added a note to my growing file. Time, date, witnesses, exact words. I even started recording small emails to myself as backups. This wasn't just preparation, it was self-protection. Maya noticed my quiet resilience. One afternoon, as we reviewed a marketing brief together, she said softly, "You're doing the right thing. Don't let him intimidate you. He's testing you because he feels threatened by your strength, not your pregnancy." Her words hit me. He was desperate. His laughter, his mockery, his attempts to undermine me were signs of fear. Fear that I wasn't backing down. Fear that his behavior could finally be exposed. Then came the first direct warning. Mr. Thompson called me into his office, closing the door behind us. He leaned back, smirking, trying to exude casual control. "Emily," he said, "I hope you're not letting this pregnancy distract you from your work. Some people take personal news too seriously. I'd hate for your performance to slip." I sat quietly, holding my ground. "I appreciate your concern, but my work speaks for itself." He raised an eyebrow, his smirk fading slightly. "Just remember, Emily, loyalty and dedication are more important than personal distractions. Don't let HR or anyone else interfere with your priorities here." I understood the message loud and clear. He knew I had started documenting his behavior. He was warning me, trying to intimidate me into silence. But instead of fear, his words fueled my determination. That evening, I shared the incident with HR, providing details and the context of his thinly veiled threat. They assured me the report would be filed confidentially and that the company would monitor the situation closely. Still, I knew I had to remain vigilant. Mr. Thompson was clever and his next move could escalate. I doubled my efforts, documenting every interaction, keeping records safe, and quietly consulting legal resources about pregnancy discrimination. By the end of the week, I realized something crucial. He underestimated me. He thought I would back down or feel powerless. But in truth, his mockery and threats had made me stronger, more focused, and more prepared than ever. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preparing to hold him accountable. If your manager subtly warned you to stop reporting their behavior, would you feel intimidated or more determined to take action? The following week, I realized I couldn't fight this battle alone. While HR was listening, the support of colleagues who had witnessed Mr. Thompson's behavior could make all the difference. I began speaking quietly to a few trusted coworkers, explaining what had happened and asking if they had noticed similar incidents. Some were hesitant. Fear lingered in the office like a thick fog. No one wanted to draw attention to themselves, and everyone had seen what happened when someone challenged him. But a few, like Maya and James from accounting, were willing to step forward. Their courage, quiet but steady, bolstered my own. I realized I wasn't just documenting my experience. I was building a network of evidence and support. I also began keeping copies of emails, meeting notes, and project assignments in a secure folder. Everything was time-stamped and organized, every small incident recorded. The pattern was undeniable. He mocked me, undermined my authority, and questioned my competence because I was pregnant. I had HR's acknowledgement, but concrete proof would strengthen my case beyond doubt. One afternoon, during a project briefing, Mr. Thompson made a pointed remark about my condition in front of a group. "Let's not expect miracles, Emily, okay? We don't want anyone overestimating what's possible now." Laughter followed from a few employees, uncomfortable but audible. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't just inappropriate, it was discriminatory and humiliating, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I calmly replied, "I assure you, Mr. Thompson, the project will meet all deadlines and expectations." Their eyes met mine, silently acknowledging my poise. Some were surprised, others inspired, but no one laughed. In that moment, I understood the power of composure. Standing firm, refusing to be intimidated, could shift perceptions, even in a room full of fear. After the meeting, Maya approached me quietly. "You handled that perfectly. People are noticing. You're showing him that he can't push you around." I smiled faintly, appreciating her support, but I also knew that this was just the beginning. Mr. Thompson would likely escalate. I had to remain vigilant, collecting every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every email, every note. That evening, I reviewed my growing collection of documents. The evidence was mounting and the picture was clear. This wasn't a single incident. It was a deliberate pattern of discrimination and harassment. With HR on record and colleagues willing to testify, the foundation of a strong case was forming. I realized something important. Fighting for respect wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that no one else would endure the same humiliation. And with careful preparation, strategy, and allies, I felt a surge of determination. Mr. Thompson had mocked me for being pregnant, but he had no idea what was coming. I was no longer just a target. I was a force. If you had coworkers willing to support you against discrimination, would you feel more confident or cautious about taking further action? A few days later, HR called me back into the office. This time, Ms. Patel's expression was serious but calm. "Emily, we've reviewed your documentation and spoken with witnesses. Your complaint is being formally logged, and we are taking steps to ensure this situation is addressed immediately." Relief flooded me, but I also felt a surge of caution. Mr. Thompson was clever, manipulative, and unpredictable. While HR's involvement was a critical step, I knew the real challenge had just begun. The very next day, subtle changes appeared in the office. Mr. Thompson seemed on edge, sharper in meetings, more careful with his words. He smiled less and monitored interactions more closely, his attempts to intimidate now tinged with visible frustration. It was as if he sensed the walls closing in. During a team discussion, he made a passing comment about deadlines, carefully choosing words that no longer carried mockery but tested boundaries. I responded professionally, firmly, and without fear. The room was silent, colleagues exchanging glances, some offering subtle nods of support. I realized that HR's involvement had not only empowered me, but also emboldened others to stand quietly in solidarity. That afternoon, Ms. Patel met with me privately again. "You've done everything correctly," she said, "and your patience is commendable. We're documenting every instance and preparing for a formal review with senior management. Any retaliation will be taken very seriously." I left her office with a renewed sense of purpose. HR's acknowledgement wasn't just reassurance. It was a shield and a signal to Mr. Thompson that his behavior would not go unnoticed or unpunished. Back at my desk, I took a moment to organize the growing pile of evidence. Emails, notes, witness statements, all carefully filed. I even began drafting a timeline to present a clear, indisputable record of his harassment. Each entry strengthened my resolve and my position. James stopped by my cubicle. "He's nervous," he whispered, glancing toward Mr. Thompson, who was busy with reports but clearly distracted. "You've shaken him more than you know." I nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The combination of documentation, HR involvement, and subtle ally support was creating pressure Mr. Thompson couldn't ignore. That evening, I reviewed the plan for the next steps. I would continue documenting, maintain professionalism, and let HR guide the formal process. I didn't need to escalate recklessly. The law and company policy were now firmly on my side. For the first time since announcing my pregnancy, I felt a sense of control. The humiliation and fear were still there, but they were now tempered by strategy, support, and growing confidence. Mr. Thompson might have mocked me, but he could no longer silence me. The office felt different, quieter, more observant. People were watching, not with fear, but with awareness. And I knew that each day, as long as I stayed diligent, the momentum would continue to build toward accountability and justice. I packed my bag that night, feeling exhaustion mixed with determination. The path ahead was challenging, but I was no longer alone, and the law was firmly on my side. If HR formally acknowledged your complaint, would you trust the process fully or remain cautious while documenting every detail? By the start of the next week, subtle shifts in the office became impossible to ignore. Mr. Thompson moved through the floor with forced composure, glancing repeatedly at my desk. His usual arrogance was tinged with unease, as if he sensed the scrutiny growing around him. HR's involvement and the quietly documented evidence had begun to weigh on him. Meetings became tense, his remarks clipped and careful. When he attempted small jokes about my pregnancy, they fell flat. Colleagues exchanged glances, unsure if they should laugh, and I noticed subtle nods of support from Maya and James. The atmosphere had changed. Fear was being replaced with vigilance, and his power was quietly eroding. I continued my documentation meticulously. Every interaction, every veiled insult, every attempt to undermine me was recorded. Emails were copied, meeting notes logged, witness accounts added. Each piece of evidence built a clear, undeniable pattern. I began organizing everything into a detailed timeline, ready to present if necessary. The law and HR were on my side, but preparation ensured nothing could be dismissed. One afternoon, he called me into his office without explanation. His tone was polite but strained. "Emily," he said, "I hope your personal matters aren't interfering with work." I met his gaze steadily. "My work continues to meet all expectations, Mr. Thompson." "I assure you," he hesitated, then muttered something under his breath before dismissing me. I could feel his frustration. His attempt to intimidate had failed. He was testing boundaries, but I had learned to remain calm, professional, and unwavering. That evening, James leaned over in the office corridor. "He's losing his grip," he whispered. "He can feel HR watching, the witnesses talking, and you standing strong. Keep it up. He can't win." I nodded, feeling a quiet surge of vindication. Months of fear and humiliation had fueled my determination. The mockery, the laughter, the undermining, they had made me stronger, not weaker. I wasn't just defending myself. I was setting a precedent, demonstrating that discrimination and harassment would not be tolerated. I also began consulting with legal resources discreetly, confirming my rights and understanding potential steps if HR failed to act decisively. Knowledge, I realized, was as powerful as any formal complaint. Each law, each protection, each precedent strengthened my confidence. By the end of the week, subtle victories became clear. My manager's mockery no longer landed, the office atmosphere had shifted, and colleagues were quietly emboldened. I felt a growing sense of control and momentum. Driving home that evening, city lights reflecting off the wet streets, I allowed myself a small smile. The storm was coming, and I was ready. Mr. Thompson had underestimated me, underestimated the power of preparation, documentation, and the law. And now, the walls were closing in. I didn't need to raise my voice or make threats. The system, combined with courage and persistence, was doing its work. The next steps would be crucial, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a calm sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over, but the first cracks had appeared, and they were only growing. If your manager seemed increasingly uneasy after HR got involved, would you confront them? Or continue quietly documenting every action? By midweek, Mr. Thompson's composure was slipping. The careful, controlled persona he wore like armor began to crack, revealing subtle panic beneath. Emails were sent hastily, sometimes containing mistakes, and memos intended to intimidate employees came across as desperate attempts at control. Every misstep he made strengthened the case I had been quietly building. It started small, an email to the team chastising someone for overreacting to instructions, copied to me with a sarcastic tone. I saved it immediately, adding it to my growing evidence file. I realized he was losing patience, trying to reassert dominance, but every attempt was backfiring. That afternoon, he called me into his office unexpectedly. His voice, though outwardly calm, betrayed tension. "Emily," he said, "I noticed some discrepancies in project reports. I hope this won't become a problem." I met his gaze steadily. "I have reviewed my reports thoroughly, Mr. Thompson. Everything is accurate and on schedule." His jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. He knew I was prepared. He knew HR was monitoring. Every subtle threat or attempt at mockery now had to be weighed, calculated, and second-guessed. The dynamic had shifted. Back at my desk, Maya leaned in quietly. "He's panicking," she whispered. "I've never seen him like this." "You've shaken him without saying a word?" I smiled faintly, feeling a surge of quiet satisfaction. Months of careful documentation, calm professionalism, and legal awareness had turned the tables. His arrogance, which once allowed him to mock me openly, was now his weakness. The next day, another mistake occurred. He sent an email about project deadlines with incorrect figures, CCing HR accidentally. The tone, intended to assert authority, instead highlighted his carelessness under pressure. I printed the email, adding it to my file with the timestamp. Each error, each lapse, each moment of visible panic was proof that his behavior and attempts to intimidate were failing. By evening, I began drafting a summary document for HR, highlighting the repeated incidents of harassment, mockery, and intimidation. The timeline clearly showed a pattern, from the initial mocking announcement, to the subtle threats, to the blatant attempts at undermining my work. Each entry made the case stronger, and the law now provided clear support for my claims. Driving home, I reflected on how far I'd come. Fear had transformed into strategy, humiliation into preparation. I realized that standing firm, documenting meticulously, and maintaining professionalism were the most powerful tools I possessed. The first cracks in Mr. Thompson's armor had appeared, and the momentum was on my side. I didn't need to confront him aggressively or escalate recklessly. The combination of evidence, HR oversight, and legal knowledge was creating pressure he could no longer ignore. Tomorrow, I decided, would bring further steps, formal meetings, more scrutiny, and possibly his first real acknowledgement that his behavior was unacceptable. I felt ready. I had built strength from humiliation, courage from fear, and clarity from preparation. The balance of power was shifting, and there was no turning back. If your manager began making mistakes under pressure after HR got involved, would you continue quietly documenting or confront them directly? By the following week, the tension in the office was palpable. Mr. Thompson's nervous energy was impossible to ignore. Meetings that once flowed smoothly now carried a heavy undercurrent of unease. His jokes about my pregnancy, which had once been biting in public, had all but disappeared, replaced by clipped instructions and wary glances. The walls were closing in, and I could sense it. HR scheduled a formal meeting with him to discuss my complaints. I wasn't in the room, but the announcement alone sent ripples through the office. Colleagues exchanged cautious smiles, some whispering, others observing silently. Even those who had been hesitant before now seemed to recognize that accountability was imminent. That afternoon, Mr. Thompson called me into his office. He was quieter than usual, the confidence that once radiated from him replaced by subtle tension. "Emily," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I've been informed about your concerns. HR is involved. I want you to know I take your feedback seriously." I nodded, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I appreciate that HR is addressing this matter." His eyes flickered, betraying a hint of panic. I realized he was weighing every word, every gesture, aware that any misstep could escalate consequences. He tried to regain control subtly, assigning last-minute tasks and questioning my project choices, but I remained composed. Each move he made was carefully logged, adding to the growing evidence of harassment and intimidation. Back at my desk, I reviewed the notes I had compiled over weeks, emails, witness accounts, meeting summaries, and the subtle threats he had issued. The pattern was undeniable. My careful documentation, combined with HR's involvement, had created a situation where his power was no longer absolute. Maya leaned over my cubicle, whispering, "He's on edge. He's never been this careful around anyone. You've got him right where you want him." I smiled faintly. She was right. The fear and control that had once been his tools were now failing. The more he tried to regain dominance, the more exposed he became. Every small error, every miscalculated comment, reinforced the strength of my case. That evening, I began drafting a final summary for HR, outlining the timeline of harassment and mockery, highlighting witness statements, and including supporting emails. The document was precise, factual, and undeniable. I knew that when HR presented it in the upcoming formal review, the momentum would tip decisively in my favor. Driving home, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Months of fear, humiliation, and careful planning had led to this turning point. Mr. Thompson's arrogance had blinded him, his cruelty had strengthened my resolve, and now accountability was imminent. I allowed myself a quiet moment of satisfaction. I wasn't just defending myself, I was challenging a culture of fear and discrimination. The law, HR, and my meticulous preparation were converging to deliver justice, and there was no going back. The confrontation was coming, and this time, I would emerge stronger, validated, and unbroken. If your manager was clearly nervous under scrutiny, would you confront them confidently, or let HR handle the situation fully? The day of the formal HR review arrived, and the office felt unusually quiet, as if everyone sensed something significant was about to happen. Mr. Thompson arrived early, attempting to carry his usual confidence, but the tightness around his eyes and the stiffness in his posture betrayed the tension he could no longer hide. I waited outside the meeting room, reviewing my notes one last time. Every incident, every email, every witness account was clearly documented. I felt calm, prepared, and strangely empowered. Months of humiliation, subtle threats, and daily anxiety had led to this moment. The balance of power had shifted, and now the law and HR would formalize it. Inside the room, Mr. Thompson tried to assert control at first, speaking in clipped, measured tones. But HR's representatives, led by Ms. Patel, were firm. "We have reviewed Emily's documentation and spoken with witnesses," she began. The pattern of comments, jokes, and undermining behavior constitutes harassment and discrimination based on pregnancy. This is unacceptable, and corrective measures are required immediately. His mouth opened, then closed, words faltering. He tried to explain, deflect, and rationalize, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every email, every note, every witness account reinforced the truth. The smirk he once wore so confidently was gone, replaced by visible panic and frustration. After the meeting, I returned to my desk, my hands still trembling slightly. A sense of vindication washed over me. HR had formally acknowledged the harassment, and the corrective measures would be enforced. Mr. Thompson would face monitoring, warnings, and accountability measures. The fear he had imposed on me and others was finally being addressed. Colleagues approached me quietly, offering support and congratulations. Maya whispered, "You did it. You stood strong, and now he can't mock anyone else without consequences." James added, "This will send a message. People will know that harassment won't be tolerated." I realized that my victory was about more than just my personal situation. It was about creating a safer, fairer workplace for everyone. The mockery, the intimidation, the subtle attempts to belittle had been powerful tools for him. But when faced with documentation, HR, and unwavering resolve, those tools failed. That evening, I reviewed the files one last time before archiving them securely. The timeline, the emails, the witness statements, all told a story of courage, strategy, and persistence. Every moment of fear had been transformed into strength. Every laugh at my expense had fueled meticulous preparation. And now, justice was being served. Driving home, I allowed myself a quiet smile. Mr. Thompson's arrogance, his attempts to belittle, and his cruelty had been countered not by anger or confrontation alone, but by careful preparation, legal awareness, and steadfast professionalism. For the first time in months, I felt safe, validated, and empowered. The tipping point had arrived, and the lessons were clear. Documentation matters, allies matter, courage matters, and above all, the law is a shield when used wisely. The office would continue its routines, but the atmosphere had changed. Fear had been replaced with awareness, humiliation with accountability, and a lesson had been delivered that could not be ignored. If you were Emily, would you publicly celebrate your victory at work or maintain quiet professionalism after HR's formal review? The following week, the office felt different, lighter, more measured, and filled with subtle relief. Mr. Thompson still worked there, but his presence was muted, stripped of the arrogance and mockery he had once wielded like a weapon. He moved cautiously, aware that his every action was now monitored, documented, and accountable. HR followed up with him, enforcing corrective measures, making it clear that retaliation or further harassment would not be tolerated. Policies were reviewed, procedures reinforced, and a message was sent, not just to him but to the entire team, that discrimination and humiliation would no longer go unchecked. For me, the change was profound. Walking into the office no longer brought dread or anxiety. I could focus on my work without fear of ridicule, and I could participate in meetings confidently, knowing that my rights were protected. Colleagues were quieter but more supportive, offering smiles, small nods, and quiet acknowledgments of the victory we had all witnessed. Maya approached me at lunch, a genuine smile on her face. "You did it," she said softly. "You stood firm, documented everything, and now everyone knows harassment won't be tolerated. You've made a difference, not just for yourself, but for everyone here." James added, "It was your courage and preparation that turned the tables. He underestimated you completely. Now the office culture has changed." Sitting at my desk, I reflected on the journey, the fear, the humiliation, the long nights of careful documentation, the whispered support from colleagues, and the strategic patience with HR and legal guidance. It had been exhausting, stressful, and sometimes terrifying, but it had been worth every moment. I realized the story wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about empowerment, accountability, and creating a precedent. I had shown that even subtle, persistent harassment could be challenged successfully. I had demonstrated the power of preparation, evidence, and knowing your rights. And I had discovered a resilience I didn't know I possessed. Driving home that evening, I felt a mixture of relief and pride. The stress of fear had lifted, replaced with quiet confidence. Mr. Thompson's actions no longer held power over me. The workplace, once a site of humiliation, had become a place where fairness was reinforced and respect regained. I also thought about the broader lesson. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in careful documentation, in calm professionalism, and in strategic patience. Justice is not only about punishment, it's about empowerment, protection, and change. The office would continue, projects would still be due, and emails would still ping endlessly, but the balance had shifted permanently. Fear had been replaced by accountability, humiliation by respect, and silence by a clear voice that stood firm in truth. As I closed my laptop that night, I allowed myself a rare, contented smile. I had faced mockery, intimidation, and the weight of unfairness, but I had emerged stronger, victorious, and unbroken. The journey had ended, and justice had been served. If you were in Emily's shoes, how would you use this victory to inspire others facing workplace discrimination?